Good afternoon and welcome to the Every Student Succeeds Act webinar. We have just a few reminders for today. The slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. Should you need technical assistance, click on the Help button. You are encouraged to submit a question anytime during today's presentation by typing in the Ask a Question tab and clicking Submit. In order to stay within our time, we will not be able to answer all questions individually, but all questions will be reviewed to provide future guidance. If your screen freezes or the slides do not appear to be advancing as they should be, please try exiting and restarting the session, as it may be an issue with your connectivity. I would now like to turn the call over to Kevin Draper, Assistant Director in the Office of Educator Effectiveness at the Ohio Department of Education. Please go ahead, Kevin.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. This is the fifth in a series of webinars the department is hosting to engage with you regarding Ohio's ESSA plan. It is critical for us to get your feedback so Ohio can craft and submit a plan which reflects the needs of Ohio's students, educators, and communities. In order for this to happen, we must gather everyone's input. Today we are discussing the topic of state and local equitable access plans. Before we can do so, we need to define what is equitable access or equity. ESSA defines and requires that states and districts must ensure that poor and minority students are not taught at disproportionate rates by ineffective, out-of-field, or inexperienced teachers, and must measure and report on progress toward eliminating inequities. So again, there is a focus on poor and minority students. If you're unfamiliar with the terms ineffective, out-of-field, or inexperienced, we will define those later. We'll take a quick look at how Ohio currently addresses this situation. In 2015, Ohio submitted its plan to ensure equitable access to excellent educators. We'll discuss that a little bit further in a minute. This was published in June 2015, accepted by the U.S. Department of Ed in November of 2015, and was implemented at the state level and is ongoing from December of 2015. If you would like additional information about the full plan, you can find that on our website if you search equity. The full plan is about 70 pages long. If you'd like a shorter summary, the executive summary is about 10 pages long. Various ESSA acts have included equity plannings at a state and local requirement. This began with the No Child Left Behind Act, where the focus was on teacher quality, specifically highly qualified teachers. All states were to have 100% highly qualified teachers in their classrooms by 2005. When ESSA was not reauthorized in 2014, the U.S. Department of Education announced the Excellent Educators for All initiative, requiring states to revisit their equity plans from NCLB. The Excellent Educators for All initiative from the U.S. Department of Education called for states to develop a plan to ensure poor and minority students are not taught at higher rates than other children by inexperienced, unqualified, or out-of-field teachers, a reoccurring requirement of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Right now, we'd like to pause for a quick poll question to gather some information and feedback from yourselves. So if you would take a moment to answer, how familiar are you with Ohio's 2015 plan to ensure equitable access to excellent educators, or the Educator Equity Plan? Very, somewhat, or not at all? So now that we have about half of our respondents there, it's interesting to see that individuals are either somewhat or not at all familiar with the Equitable Access Plan, which is a great opportunity for us to share this information with you. The state plan had a variety of requirements from the U.S. Department of Ed, and they are comprised of these 6 components. First, they were to describe and provide documentation of stakeholder consultation, identify equity gaps, conduct a root cause analysis, outline steps to eliminate those equity gaps, describe measures that will be used to evaluate progress toward eliminating the equity gaps, and finally describe how the state will publicly report the progress. We'd now like to take you through those requirements step by step. So before we could begin, we had to involve our stakeholders, and it was comprised mainly of these three main conditions. We gathered 28 stakeholders from various educational entities. These included teachers, higher ed, school boards, community groups, and the full list is listed in our equity plan itself. These individuals advised in the development of the state equity plan and made recommendations on the definitions of the measures that were going to be included in our plan and our monitoring tool. This slide identifies the measures that were identified by that group to be used for our monitoring. As outlined by the U.S. Department of Ed, we are focusing on our poor or minority students. Our poor students are identified and reported to the Ohio Department of Education as the student level at an economic disadvantage. Minority students include the populations you can see before you. Ohio elected to have 5 measures involved in their educator status: an unqualified teacher, an out-of-field teacher, an ineffective teacher, and an ineffective principal. An unqualified teacher is one teaching a core academic subject for which he or she is not designated highly qualified with respect to the content knowledge requirements. An out-of-field teacher is one who is teaching a core academic course that he or she is not licensed to teach. An inexperienced teacher is one who is in his or her first or second year of teaching. And an ineffective teacher is a teacher who received a final summative rating of ineffective on the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System. The same goes for our principals in our OPES system. Thinking about the measures that we just discussed, we'd like to get some of your feedback. This is a relatively big question, so if you'd like to think about it a little bit longer, we'd certainly be happy to receive your information through our email at essa@education.ohio.gov, but we'd also like to give you an opportunity to respond in the chat box. The questions are as follows. What other education measures could be considered in equity planning besides the required ineffective, out-of-field, or inexperienced teacher? Additionally, do you believe Ohio should redefine the measures in the current equity plan? And, if so, how could they be redefined to fit Ohio's current context? We'll give you a minute or so to write your responses. Once again, if you'd like some additional time to think about and provide those feedback, there is always the essa@education.ohio.gov email box that we would welcome your suggestions and comments. As we look at our state equity gaps, we had to conduct a gap analysis. First, we needed to identify what a gap would be. Ohio defined that to be any degree of difference, high versus low, that suggests that poor and minority students are receiving less access to excellent educators than other students. Our population was then divided into quartiles, and we chose to examine the highest quartile and the lowest quartile for points of comparison. The information was gathered through ETPES data and involved public and community schools. We'd like to share some of the information that we found and some examples. The data analysis revealed that Ohio's poor and minority students have inequitable access to excellent educators. Equity gaps were shown for all 5 measures included in the plan. One example is highlighted here. This example shows that the number of teachers evaluated ineffective on the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System is higher in the highest poverty quartile school buildings than the lowest poverty quartile school buildings. The value you should be seeing there is 50. If you'd like some additional information, please refer to pages 13 and 15 of Ohio's Educator Equity Plan for more gap analysis information. As stated, a quantitative data analysis helped to identify where equity gaps were occurring and to what extent the gaps were occurring for Ohio students in poverty and minority students. When the analysis was complete, it showed that these students do receive inequitable access to excellent educators on all measures. We'll now provide some specific examples. This is a glimpse at some 2013-14 data, and it examines the 5 measures from the perspective of poverty. And again, it's examining the highest and lowest quartile. You can take an example and look at some of the information there on that slide. Additionally, we can take a secondary look at the 5 measures from the perspective of a minority population, and we can see that there is similar information coming from that equity gap analysis. Through a qualitative analysis and work with our stakeholder groups, stakeholders participated in the root cause analysis for each of the 5 measures for both poverty and minority. Equity gaps were found within each. Through that process, many root causes arose, and in the end were captured through these 4 root cause categories for inequitable access to excellent educators. They include educator preparation, hiring and deployment, teaching and learning conditions, and data use. To give you a little bit of more understanding, an example for hiring deployment is identifying late hiring timelines, shortage areas, transfer policies, and negative perceptions. As a component of developing state plans, states were also required to outline the strategies that we're going to undertake to eliminate their identified equity gaps. Ohio has identified 4 key strategy areas that align to the root cause findings. You can find them above. These 4 include strengthen educator preparation, target hiring and deployment barriers, improve teaching and learning conditions, and provide data to encourage strategic staffing and educator development. Under these 4 are multiple, 38 in total, sub-strategies that can help in improving equitable access at the state and local levels. The full list of strategies can be found in our plan on pages 23 through 30. The last 2 requirements focused upon evaluating progress on our state equity gaps. Ohio set goals to cut the state equity gaps in half by the year 2019-2020. The state plan website will host our state-level progress measures, and it will be updated on an annual basis as the data becomes available. That information will be posted on the ODE website. More information about that can be found on pages 37 to 42 of Ohio's Educator Equity Plan. At this time, I'd like to transfer over to Assistant Director Cheryl Crone to take you through the rest of the presentation.
Equitable access planning and progress monitoring is crucial at both the state and local levels. In order to impact Ohio's equitable access gaps, both the state and local education agencies must work in conjunction to close gaps. Ohio's 2015 Educator Equity Plan established local planning beginning in 2016-17. Districts and schools engage in the planning process in collaboration with stakeholders. This can include, but not limited to, teachers, principals, district administration, school improvement support staff, human resources, community members, and/or other stakeholders deemed appropriate for this planning process. Once districts identify their stakeholder group, they will begin to engage in equitable access planning with the stakeholders. This process must include analyzing data to determine equity gaps, engage in a root cause analysis, and determining strategies they will use to close equity gaps. Local equitable access planning will occur in the Comprehensive Continuous Improvement Plan under the Highly Qualified Teacher Component tab under items 3, 4, and 5. Three categories of data are utilized for local planning. First is student data at the building level. This data will be provided in quartiles: high, medium, low, and low. Second is educator data that has been reported to ODE through EMIS and ETPES. Note that the percent ineffective principal is not calculated at the building level, but rather the district and state level only, unless there is only one building for a local education agency. Lastly, an index value that offers a comparison point across buildings will be provided. The index ranges from 0 to 100, with 100 being an ideal score where a school, district, or state would have all highly qualified, experienced, in-field, and effective teachers and effective principals. Monitoring progress across the state began this fiscal year 17. Districts will submit the 3 equitable access planning items in the CCIP by September 30th. After submission, the Center for the Teaching Profession will work together with federal programs to review submitted local equity plans. This year, the highly qualified teacher component opened in the CCIP in June 2016, and this also is when the Equitable Access Analysis Tool became available. Items 1, 2, and 6 of the HQT component were due July 1st, 2016, as those items have been reoccurring for many years and districts are familiar with completing those items. Items 3, 4, and 5 will be due on September 30th, 2016, as these components are new to the process, and the department anticipated a longer time for district personnel to engage in the planning process with stakeholders. We would like to take a moment to poll the audience on the following question. What is the best time to engage in local equity planning? Winter, spring, summer, or fall? Please take note that the data tool is likely available in fall. It may also be important to consider that equitable access planning has a focus on human capital management, considering the hiring, placement, induction, evaluation, and development of educators. All right, and thank you for your feedback. It looks like at this point, winter and spring look like the time frames that are most ideal based on your feedback. With the passage of ESSA, many states questioned if equity plans from 2015 would continue to be implemented during the transition year. In an FAQ to states, the U.S. Department of Education provided guidance that yes, the plans would be implemented during the transition year, and noted that ESSA contains a similar requirement. This was welcome news since Ohio stakeholders worked hard to develop an equity plan that fit the context of Ohio. In the ESSA state agency plan, we are required to include how low-income and minority children enrolled in schools assisted under this part are not served at disproportionate rates by ineffective, out-of-field, or inexperienced teachers, and the measures the state educational agency will use to evaluate and publicly report the progress of the state educational agency. In the ESSA state plan, Ohio also needs to include how the local educational agency will identify and address, as required under state plans as described in section 1111G1B, any disparities that result in low-income students and minority students being taught at higher rates than other students by ineffective, inexperienced, or out-of-field teachers. There are a few implications for Ohio to consider when it comes to equitable access to excellent educators and Ohio's 2015 Educator Equity Plan. First, Ohio's current plan already defines the terms required in ESSA. Second, since Ohio will continue to engage in local equity planning, it may be key to consider when is the most ideal timeline for equity planning at the local level, noting again data tools are most likely available in late fall on an annual basis. Lastly, Ohio would have the opportunity to, but may not be required to, amend the current plan. Feedback from today can be used to move equitable access planning forward to ensure the work we are engaging in can help close Ohio's equity gaps. We would like to take a moment to offer some time again for feedback on the following question. What else can Ohio do to address equitable access to effective educators? You may type your response in the chat box or email essa@education.ohio.gov. We will take a few moments to allow for feedback. Multiple resources are available to build understanding of the state and local equity plans. Go to education.ohio.gov and search keywords State Equity Plan or Local Equity Plan. On those pages, you may find some of the following. The approved Ohio's 2015 Educator Equity Plan in PDF form, and an executive summary is also available. The Local Equitable Access Planning Guide, which assists local education agency personnel in understanding the new items and data tool they will use to meet the local equity planning requirements. Local Equitable Access Strategies. This provides a list of possible strategies and information to help local education agency personnel in local equity planning. And lastly, Local Equitable Access Planning YouTube video segments, which delivers information to assist agencies in the equitable access planning process. The department also has an equity mailbox for locals to get assistance with any questions they might have. The address is equity@education.ohio.gov. The department will be looking to receive feedback on the new local planning items during the Fall Federal Programs Conference on October 25th during our session from 1 to 2:15 p.m. We welcome feedback from locals who've engaged in the process and have feedback and thoughts on how it could be improved for the future. As Ohio moves forward in developing the plan for ESSA and takes stakeholder feedback into consideration, there are two additional questions for our audience to consider. One, what are the benefits to amending the current educator equity plan? And two, what are the challenges that must be considered in amending the current educator equity plan? Type benefit challenges in the chat box or email essa@education.ohio.gov. Before we get to your questions this afternoon, we want to invite everyone to take the ESSA survey, which is now live on education.ohio.gov. In an effort to reach out to more Ohioans about these important issues, the department created a survey to get feedback on several focus areas within ESSA, including accountability measures, school improvement, educator quality, and student support. Again, it is available until October 6th at education.ohio.gov. We appreciate your feedback and comments.
Cheryl and Kevin, thank you so much for your presentation this afternoon. It looks like we have time for a few questions, and we want to remind everyone that if you'd like to submit a question or a comment or a response to any of the questions that David asked this afternoon, please feel free to enter them into the chat box and click submit. Cheryl and Kevin, who in a district or school should conduct an equity analysis, and then who should be involved in implementing that plan?
So when it comes to equity analysis, it should be a stakeholder group, and that can depend on your context as to who you involve, from superintendents, principals, teachers, community members, teacher representatives. It's important that it mirrors a good makeup of the district, because what we've learned through the state process is that oftentimes different perspectives really help engage and help you learn about equity and what might be happening within the district. So it's definitely recommended that it's a stakeholder group that is involved, but the makeup can look different depending on the district or school.
Thank you. Is it possible that after a school or district conducts their equity analysis that they may find that no gaps exist?
Yes, so it's definitely true. You definitely want to look closely at your data from the Equitable Access Analysis tool. And if you've met with stakeholders, looked over the data, it's a possibility. But also we encourage people to look at other educator data that they might have that they think, again, mirrors their local context and is of importance to them. And all you have to do is note in item 3 that you used other data available and what that data would be, so we know what to use.
Earlier you mentioned the equitable access plan measures in a student being categorized as either poor or in poverty. How is that determined?
Those are based off of our report card data and how students are identified on a state level in poverty. I believe it's at 75% or more below.
Thank you, Kevin. When do districts need to have an equitable access plan in the CCIP?
So the plan is due September 30th.
You detailed several strategies that the state has. Is there a timeline with respect to those strategies, or are those ongoing?
So the state level strategies, in the appendices, you'll see we have time frames for different pieces, at least at the state level. And we kind of know at the local level, some of these strategies are not something you do overnight. They're something you have to take time and plan to do. And so there's some room and space to say what your implementation time frame would be for the strategy that you've chosen, because ours also mirrors that. Some of the strategies already did exist in Ohio or were part of initiatives that were currently happening and have some movement forward. And then some are things that we will be doing in the future. We anticipate the work and we'll be planning for that work to occur.
Michael, if I could just clarify for the last question on student dimensions, if you go to page 11 of our state equity plan, it does define student poverty. And again, in our analysis, schools in the highest quartile of poverty enrollment have greater than 75% of their average daily enrollment represented by students reported as economically disadvantaged. So again, if you want to dig a little further into that data, that's on page 11.
Thank you, Kevin. Are these requirements for community schools as well as school districts?
Yes, the requirements are for anyone receiving Title I funding. So community schools would be included in that as well.
Thank you very much. Looks like we have time for just a couple of more questions before we conclude this afternoon. Cheryl, did you mention a conference that's upcoming near the end of October?
Yes, the Federal Programs Conference that occurs typically in fall and spring. We often show up there and talk about equity, and so this is not new. We do tend to show up. And so what we're looking for in this session is really districts that have engaged in the process and really have taken note of things they would like to see maybe differently or things they really liked and want to be encouraged to move forward. This is the time and place to do it. We'll quickly review some of the equity plan requirements, but a lot of the session will be focused on getting feedback so we can improve the CCIP process the following year.
Great. Do you have the date handy for that conference? If not...
yeah, it's October 25th.
October 25th.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. And looks like we have a lot of individuals who have been submitting comments in response to your questions throughout, so we really appreciate that. We'll leave the chat box open for a little bit longer as we proceed, but this will be our last question this afternoon. Is there a sample plan or additional tools or resources that districts and schools may access?
Yeah, so on our website, we have the state plan, the executive summary, and actually the previous equity plan as well, which can be a resource to use. And then on the local planning webpage, we have a variety of resources and some sample responses. If you look in the HQT component document, we have samples in there of responses that could be used, so people kind of have an idea, since this planning is new, what a likely response might be and a way to tackle the information. But USDOE also has a website, and I don't have it handy, but they do have a website where they've posted every state equity plan. So those are also available. As far as local plans in the future, as we vet through them and see plans that we think, are of a higher standard, really could impact the work, we'll try to make things like that available in the future. It's hard to do right now, though, as this is really the first time that we're doing this process.
Thank you. And Kevin and Cheryl, do you have any closing comments before we conclude this afternoon?
I would just say that, as Cheryl was talking about, when you're gathering your stakeholder group, it's certainly important to consider your specific situation, your specific community, and your equity plan should reflect those particular needs in your specific district or your community. Although, we have these state plans that are certainly good archetypes for something that you could build or create, it should be something that's going to benefit your students and benefit your teachers, and make it a better school year for all of those involved.
Thank you very much to you both. And before we close this afternoon, we want to remind you that we have 2 upcoming webinars. Tomorrow, the department will discuss the McKinney-Vento Act for homeless students, and next week we will discuss the English Learner Report Card Indicator. And registration available is at education.ohio.gov/ESSA. And before we conclude, we want to let everyone know that our regional meetings do begin next week in Columbus. So again, at education.ohio.gov/ESSA, the full list of dates and locations is available along with registration links for each. So we encourage you to RSVP to those as well. Thank you very much for everyone for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Kevin and Cheryl, for presenting. And thank you, everyone. This concludes our webinar.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect.